The undeniable frustration of picking up a 5-gallon plastic gas jug, expecting the heavy, satisfying slosh of fuel, only to feel it swing upward effortlessly, light as a feather, is a very specific kind of madness. That was the exact moment I knew I wasn't losing my mind. My push mower held barely a quart of gasoline. I mowed a quarter-acre patch of stubborn crabgrass exactly twice a month. Yet somehow, 5 gallons of premium unleaded had vanished into thin air over the course of 3 weeks. Gasoline doesn't evaporate that fast, not even in the sweltering, oppressive humidity of a mid-July afternoon. The math simply did not add up. The liquid gold wasn't evaporating, it was walking away. And looking over the rusted chain-link fence separating my property from the overgrown jungle next door, I knew exactly who was carrying it. His name was Holly's. He was the kind of neighbor who treated property lines as mere suggestions and viewed the concept of ownership as deeply negotiable. His yard was a chaotic graveyard of discarded patio furniture, rusted automotive parts, and knee-high weeds that threatened to swallow his sagging front porch. Holly's drove a decaying, off-white sedan that burned more oil than fuel, leaving a trail of blue smoke wherever it limped. He also possessed a riding lawnmower that sounded like a blender grinding down a handful of loose gravel. He was loud, perpetually entitled, and constantly looking for a shortcut at someone else's expense. Since this was an era before cheap, wireless doorbell cameras monitored every suburban porch and driveway, catching a thief required a bit of archaic ingenuity. I retreated to my kitchen, dug out an old, clunky laptop, and routed a thick USB extension cable out the back window. I attached a cheap, clip-on webcam to the exterior window frame, angling the lens perfectly to capture the concrete patio where I stored my lawn equipment. I downloaded a rudimentary, open-source motion capture software, the kind that possessed an overly sensitive trigger and blasted a horrible, compressed chime whenever a stray squirrel twitched in the frame. With the digital trap armed, I needed to test the waters. I grabbed my keys, slammed the front door loudly enough to rattle the window panes, and drove my truck exactly 1 block away, parking out of sight behind a thick row of hedges. I sat in the driver's seat, engine idling, staring at my phone. Exactly 5 minutes later, my inbox pinged with an email alert. I opened it to find a grainy, pixelated slideshow. Frame 1. Holly's shuffling through my side gate in stained gray sweatpants. Frame 2. Holly's bending over to grab my red jerrycan. Frame 3. Holly's casually wandering back toward his own yard, the heavy can swinging from his grip. He didn't even bother to look over his shoulder. The sheer, casual entitlement of the act was breathtaking. He returned the empty can an hour later, tossing it carelessly back onto the concrete. I could have marched over there and confronted him. I could have dialed the non-emergency line for the local precinct and filed a petty theft report. But the reality of local law enforcement is that a stolen few gallons of gasoline ranks incredibly low on the dispatch priority list. A simple warning or a small municipal fine wouldn't teach a man like Holly's a lesson. He lacked the capacity for self-reflection. He needed a highly visceral, experiential learning opportunity, a mechanical reckoning. Over the course of the next 7 days, I committed myself to a regime of extreme hydration. I drank an unprecedented volume of iced tea, black coffee, and tap water. Every single time nature called, I completely bypassed the indoor plumbing and paid a visit to the red plastic jug waiting in the dim light of my garage. It takes a monumental amount of patience and dedication to fill a 5-gallon container organically. It became a daily ritual, a quiet, solitary contribution to the cause of justice. By late Friday afternoon, the jug was heavy again. It sloshed with a satisfying, dense weight. I had created a toxic, golden cocktail. The beauty of the plan lay in the container itself. The thick plastic interior had absorbed years of fuel, meaning this new liquid still carried just enough of that sharp, volatile scent of residual gasoline to completely mask any unsavory odors, especially to a man who never paid close attention to details anyway. Saturday morning arrived with a thick, sticky heat. I dragged the heavy can out to the back patio, placing it right in its usual vulnerable spot. Then I initiated the theater of departure. I popped the hood of my truck in the driveway, loudly checking the dipstick and topping off the washer fluid. I tossed a heavy canvas duffel bag into the passenger seat, making sure the doors slammed with maximum acoustic impact. Holly's was leaning on his porch railing, smoking a generic cigarette and watching me with the lazy, calculating eyes of a scavenger. "Heading out?" he yelled, hacking on the exhale, ash tumbling down the front of his shirt. "Yeah," I called back, locking the tailgate and offering a wave. Going up north to my brother's place. Gonna be gone till at least Tuesday. Keep an eye on the place for me, will you? He offered a greasy, enthusiastic thumbs up, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. You got it, neighbor, have a good trip. I pulled out of the driveway, drove out of the subdivision, circled the main thoroughfare, and parked behind a strip mall 2 streets over. I waited a full hour, letting the morning sun bake the pavement, before walking back through the neighborhood alleys. I slipped quietly through my own front door, moving like a ghost through my own living room. I bypassed the kitchen and walked straight to the back window. The red can was gone. The bait had been taken. I cracked the kitchen window just a fraction of an inch to let the outside acoustics filter in. Next door, Hollis was standing over his rusted mower. He had clearly just finished topping off the tank with his freshly acquired, heavily discounted fuel. He braced his boot against the mower deck, gripped the pull cord, and gave it a vicious yank. The engine sputtered, choked violently, and immediately died. He yanked it again, putting his back into the motion. A thick, whitish-yellow cloud of smoke puffed from the exhaust port. The breeze carried the scent through my window, and it was entirely unholy. A burnt, caramelized stench of vaporized urea mixed with scorched carbon. Hollis's face turned the deep, mottled color of an overripe plum. He swore violently, a string of profanities echoing across the fence line. He grabbed the pull cord with both hands, ripping it upward with such aggressive, uncontrolled fury that the plastic handle violently snapped off the line. The sudden loss of tension sent Hollis tumbling backward, his arms flailing, until he crashed hard into the dirt and crabgrass. Defeated by the small engine, he hurled the broken plastic handle into the weeds with a primal yell. He dusted off his sweatpants, storming over to his sagging sedan. He had clearly decided to abandon the yard work entirely, likely opting for a trip to the local liquor store to soothe his wounded pride. I watched as he popped the trunk, grabbed the red jerrycan, and emptied the remaining gallons of my special brew directly into the sedan's fuel filler neck. He tossed the empty can back onto my property, climbed into the driver's seat, and cranked the ignition. The car turned over, the starter motor whining in loud protest. Eventually it caught, idling with a rough, shuddering rhythm that visibly shook the side mirrors. Hollis threw the transmission into drive and peeled out of his driveway, determined to escape his frustrating morning. I walked out my front door and stood on the sidewalk, watching the sedan accelerate down the road. He made it exactly 2 blocks. At the intersection, the sedan let out a sound like a dying metallic beast, a horrible grinding clatter that echoed off the surrounding houses. The vehicle bucked wildly, the front end dipping and rising as the engine desperately tried to combust a liquid that was entirely uncombustible. A massive plume of white smoke erupted from the tailpipe, thick and suffocating, before the engine seized completely. The car ground to a permanent, humiliating halt right in the middle of the crosswalk. The internal components were thoroughly bathed in a corrosive slurry. The fuel pump was drowning, the spark plugs were fouled, and the block was likely locked up tighter than a bank vault. I watched Hollis punch the steering wheel in futile rage before opening the door and kicking the front tire. I turned around, walked back to my patio, and picked up the red can. I gave it a gentle shake, completely empty. That catastrophic mechanical failure would have been enough revenge for most people. It was a perfectly executed trap. But Hollis wasn't just a casual gas thief. He was an absolute, unmitigated menace to the entire street. He left trash in the gutters, played deafening music at 3 in the morning, and had a lengthy history of making everyone's life miserable. I knew from neighborhood gossip that Hollis possessed a rather checkered legal history. A quick 5-minute search through publicly available county court records confirmed the rumors. Hollis had 2 active bench warrants. One was for a string of unpaid municipal fines, and the other was for failing to appear in court for a prior misdemeanor trespassing charge. I didn't want to just call the non-emergency line and leave an anonymous tip. That lacked finesse. I wanted poetry. I wanted a conclusion so bureaucratically absurd that he would never see it coming. I navigated to the county sheriff's department website. Prominently displayed on their homepage was a community outreach initiative, a civilian ride-along program designed to foster transparency and good relations between law enforcement and the public. Anyone could apply to spend a shift riding shotgun with a deputy. I downloaded the PDF application. Under the applicant name, I typed Hollis's full legal name. Under the address, I listed his house next door. I filled out the contact information, checked the box agreeing to a background check, and specifically requested an early morning pickup for a weekend shift. I forged a digital signature and hit submit. 3 days later, at exactly 7 in the morning, the crisp, unmistakable sound of heavy tires crunching on gravel broke the quiet of the neighborhood. I stood by my front window, coffee mug in hand. A pristine, fully marked sheriff's cruiser pulled smoothly into Holly's driveway. The light bar on the roof caught the early morning sun. A uniformed deputy stepped out, adjusting his duty belt, a clipboard resting in his hand. He walked up the rotting wooden steps and knocked firmly on the front door. It took 2 minutes of continuous knocking before the door creaked open. Holly stood in the threshold wearing nothing but wrinkled boxer shorts and a stained tank top, scratching the back of his head, looking utterly bewildered by the presence of law enforcement on his porch. Through the quiet morning air, I could hear the deputy speak with cheerful professional politeness. He smiled, explaining that he was there for the scheduled community ride-along, and asked Hollies to produce a valid state-issued photo ID to clear him for the passenger seat of the cruiser. Hollies, still half asleep, heavily hungover, and entirely confused by the sequence of events, mumbled something incomprehensible. But the ingrained authority of a uniform is a powerful thing. Without thinking critically, Hollies turned around, walked back inside, and returned a moment later, handing over his driver's license. The deputy took the card, stepped back off the porch, and keyed the radio microphone attached to his shoulder epaulette. He read the license number to dispatch. Less than 2 minutes later, the radio squawked a response. The deputy's polite, community outreach smile vanished instantly. His posture shifted, becoming rigid and alert. He unclipped the heavy metal handcuffs from his belt. He instructed Hollies to turn around and place his hands behind his back. Hollies began to argue, his voice rising in panic, demanding to know what was going on, claiming there must be some kind of mistake. But the deputy was firm, expertly spinning Hollies around and snapping the steel cuffs over his wrists with a sharp, metallic click. Hollies wasn't going for a voluntary ride in the front seat. He was guided down the steps, folded awkwardly into the caged back seat of the cruiser, and the door was slammed shut behind him. The engine rumbled, the cruiser reversed out of the driveway, and Hollies finally got the police escort he had unknowingly applied for. The moral of the story is incredibly simple, yet surprisingly difficult for some to grasp. Respect your neighbor's boundaries, both invisible and physical. The things we take for granted, a few gallons of fuel left on a patio, the quiet peace of a weekend afternoon, the unspoken social contract of living in a community, are all boundaries. When you arrogantly cross them, assuming you are smarter than everyone else in the room, you might just find yourself pouring the fuel for your own absolute destruction. If you enjoyed this tale of mechanical sabotage and bureaucratic justice, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like on the video, and share your own stories of neighborly revenge down in the comments below.